Most people think the worst thing a family can hand you is a cheap burger they know you don't want. Mine handed me a contract. 30 pages of thick white paper. A binder sitting beside the potato salad like it belonged there. 4 adults around a wooden picnic table. A hot Texas sun overhead that my dad tried to ignore by scrubbing his grill. They thought they knew who I was. A poor daughter, a grateful girl, the easy target. They had forgotten I read for a living. By the time I uncapped my marker, my older sister had already stopped breathing. The people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. I had been back in my own tiny studio apartment for exactly 9 months. That is usually how long it takes a person to stop jumping every time their phone buzzes with a family group chat notification. My place was a cramped second-floor unit in Dallas, Texas, right above a noisy laundromat. The summer heat was brutal, and the cheap window AC unit rattled every single afternoon like it was coughing. But it was mine. I was 31, working as a junior paralegal for a loud, fast-paced real estate law firm downtown. I spent 8 hours a day hunting for hidden traps in commercial leases. My life was quiet now, but a year ago my messy divorce had left me with absolutely $0 and no car. My family treated my emotional pain like a dirty rug. They just swept it away and stepped right over it. That scorching Tuesday in late June, I was sitting on my cracked linoleum floor, organizing my meager grocery budget. Suddenly my doorbell rang. It wasn't just a phone call. It was Great Aunt Betty standing at my door, holding a heavy glass pitcher of my late grandmother's famous peach sweet tea. Aunt Betty was 78 years old, and my grandmother's only sister. When my grandma passed away after a long illness, Aunt Betty became my only safe space. She shared my grandma's warm eyes, her deeply rooted kindness, and her incredibly sharp mind. "Your mother has been overly sweet on Facebook lately," Aunt Betty said as I poured her a glass. The sweet tea tasted like my childhood, a stark contrast to the bitter reality of my current family dynamic. I tried to brush it off, saying Mom was just in a festive mood for the summer. Aunt Betty tapped her wooden cane on my floor. "Child, your mother doesn't do festive. Your mother does tactical planning." I forced a laugh, but my stomach tightened. Aunt Betty could spot a family trap from a mile away. We talked about her award-winning rose bushes. We talked about the suffocating Texas heat wave. Right before she left, she looked me dead in the eye. "That 4th of July BBQ is next week. Watch your back," she warned. I promised I would be careful. If you have ever accepted a massive favor from a toxic family member, you already know that the bill will eventually come due with heavy interest. My debt was exactly 9 straight months of living rent-free in my older sister Sarah's spare bedroom, plus the keys to her old 2018 Ford F-150. Sarah was 36 years old and lived in a spotless, massive suburban house. When my life fell apart, she swooped in like a hero. I had moved into her house with just 2 trash bags of clothes. During those 9 months, I paid my debt in invisible ways. I scrubbed her baseboards until my knuckles bled. I washed her cars. I basically became her live-in maid because that is how you apologize for being a burden in our family. I finally moved out the moment I saved enough from my paralegal job. But a favor is just a leash to them. Sarah had been pulling that leash since I left. At Easter, she loudly announced to the whole table, "It's just so nice to see her back on her feet after I housed her for nearly a year." I brought the potato salad, but Sarah made sure everyone knew I was eating her charity. When my cousin asked if I liked my truck, Sarah interrupted. "Oh, she loves my old Ford. I basically gave it away for free." The F-150 wasn't just a vehicle, it was a daily reminder of my failure. Every time I gripped the worn leather steering wheel, I felt my sister's judging eyes in the rearview mirror. I kept my mouth shut. I thought staying silent made me the bigger person. Before I explain the horrific trap they set for me, you need to understand Sarah's situation. My sister was not an evil cartoon villain. She was a woman whose heart had just been shattered. Just 3 months ago, Sarah received devastating medical news. After years of testing and false hopes, her doctor confirmed she would absolutely never be able to become pregnant. Her body simply could not do it. I had driven her back from that horrible appointment. I held her shaking shoulders in the sweltering hospital parking lot. I cried real, painful tears for her. But feeling sorry for someone does not mean you owe them your life. Grief can turn selfish if you let it rot, and my family let it rot. A few weeks after Sarah's diagnosis, I walked into my parents' kitchen to grab a glass of water and overheard my mother whispering fiercely to Sarah near the pantry. She owes you, Sarah. She's young, she's healthy, and she's not doing anything important with her life right now. I froze. She meant me. I quietly backed out of the kitchen, terrified, swallowing the panic like a jagged rock. I didn't tell a single soul, not even Great Aunt Betty. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Then my mother called me on a Wednesday. That was the ultimate red flag because my mother only ever texted, "Hey sweetie, we are doing a massive 4th of July BBQ at 2:30 p.m. sharp. Your dad is so excited to see you." My dad never asked to see me. My dad just grunted and watched sports. Dad even bought a brand new $2,000 smoker grill just for this, she added. My dad was notoriously cheap. Buying an expensive grill meant this wasn't a party, it was a grand presentation. That sounds nice, I lied, my voice shaking. Everyone will be there, she continued cheerfully. Just family. We want a perfectly relaxing, stress-free afternoon. I wrote the words stress-free on my legal notepad and drew a thick black box around them. In our family, stress-free usually meant someone was about to get emotionally destroyed. We talked about the potato salad. We talked about who was bringing the fireworks. I promised I would be there at 2:30 p.m. sharp. In my family, stress-free has preceded every screaming match, every broken holiday, and one spectacularly ruined vacation to Florida. After hanging up with my mother, I stood in my cramped kitchen and let the cheap AC rattle. My Great Aunt Betty had warned me to watch my back. My mother had promised a relaxing BBQ. A toxic family member who loudly announces they want peace is usually the one hiding the matches. I dried my sweating hands. I grabbed my phone and called Aunt Betty back. "I think I need to come over to your place this Saturday," I said. She replied, "I've already pruned the yellow roses and made a pitcher of lemonade, front porch." That was how my great aunt and I prepared for battle. I opened my work laptop. I didn't just look up standard templates. I logged into my law firm's elite legal database and spent 4 agonizing hours researching Texas family law, specifically focusing on coerced medical agreements and familial financial extortion. Great Aunt Betty had 3 simple rules for surviving this family. Never co-sign a loan, always keep a full tank of gas, and never trust my mother when she offers you food. Betty lived in a small historic bungalow in East Dallas. She grew her prize-winning roses the way a sniper cleans their rifle, with absolute precision and 0 apologies. I drove out that Saturday morning. We sat on her porch swing. The humidity was already suffocating. "Your mother texted me yesterday," Aunt Betty said, pouring lemonade. "She casually asked if I thought you'd ever settle down and start a family since you're wasting your youth." I squeezed my glass. I thought she gave up on my love life after my divorce. Aunt Betty looked at me with her piercing blue eyes. "People like your mother don't give up, child. They just change their angle of attack." When I stood up to leave, Aunt Betty reached into the deep pocket of her floral apron. She pulled out a thick, bright yellow highlighter and pressed it firmly into my palm. "Whatever they try to shove in your face, don't just stare at it. Mark it. Take their power away." I slipped the highlighter into my purse. I promised her I would be ready. The 4th of July BBQ, exactly 2:30 p.m. The Dallas sun was beating down like a hammer as I pulled Sarah's 2018 Ford F-150 into my parents' sprawling driveway. I sat in the truck cab with the AC blasting for a full minute. My stomach was doing violent flips. I gripped the yellow highlighter in my pocket like it was a weapon. I finally stepped out into the sweltering 102-degree heat. I walked through the side gate into the backyard. My parents' backyard looked like a magazine cover, but the tension in the air was so thick you could cut it with a steak knife. My dad was standing on the patio, aggressively flipping burgers on his massive $2,000 black steel smoker grill. The thick hickory smoke blew directly into my face, making my eyes sting and water instantly. He just grunted a deep hey without making eye contact. My mother rushed over, her smile stretched way too tight across her face. "You made it, right on time," she cheered, grabbing my arm a little too hard. The cheerfulness was weaponized. Then I saw my sister. Sarah was standing under the expensive patio umbrella. She was wearing a flowing, stark white sundress that deliberately flared out at the waist. It looked exactly like a maternity gown. She was playing the tragic victim before anyone even spoke. Sarah didn't hug me. She just gave me a tight, trembling smile that looked like she had practiced it in a mirror for 3 days. And then I spotted it, sitting right in the middle of the red and white checkered picnic table. Sandwiched between the plastic forks and the sesame seed burger buns was a massive, professionally bound 30-page contract. It had a thick black coil binding and a clear plastic cover. It wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a legal trap. You women out there who have always been the family scapegoat, you know the exact feeling when the trap finally snaps shut. My dad brought a heavy platter of charred burgers to the table. We all sat down on the wooden benches. Mom at the head, Dad on her right. Sarah sat directly across from me. The 30-page binder sat exactly 6 inches from my paper plate. Nobody touched it yet. We ate in agonizing silence. My dad aggressively chewed his burger, staring at the fence. My mom kept nervously adjusting the massive bowl of potato salad. Sarah stared blankly at her untouched hot dog, perfectly playing the role of the shattered, heartbroken woman. The Dallas heat wrapped around my throat like a hot, wet towel. I took a slow sip of lukewarm water. I waited. I knew they couldn't keep quiet forever. In our house, nobody just asks for a massive favor. They corner you when you are most vulnerable. I had learned a long time ago that my family never approached a problem directly. They buttered you up, fed you, and then dropped the axe. The Texas heat index was pushing 110 degrees, and the ice in my plastic cup had completely melted into warm water. We had been sitting at that picnic table for maybe 10 agonizing minutes. The cicadas were buzzing loudly in the oak trees. Suddenly, my dad violently slammed his heavy metal spatula down on the metal side of his smoker grill. The loud clang echoed across the yard. That was the signal. The trap was springing. My mother stopped pretending to care about her potato salad. She leaned across the red and white checkered tablecloth. Sarah has received some devastating medical news recently, my mother began, her voice dripping with an artificial, practiced sadness. As a family, we believe in stepping up. We fix things, and you, young lady, are going to be the one to fix this for her. I carefully put my plastic fork down on my paper plate. I didn't say a single word. I just waited. Sarah leaned forward, her white maternity-style sundress clinging to her sweating shoulders. "You know my body is broken," she whimpered, her voice cracking perfectly on cue. "I can't do this. But your body works perfectly fine. You can give me this miracle. You owe me." There it was, the disgusting heavy word owe. The betrayal felt like swallowing a mouthful of battery acid. For a year, I had foolishly believed my sister's generosity was born out of love. Now, sitting in the suffocating heat, I realized I was never a sister to them. I was just a human incubator they had put on layaway. My mom suddenly pointed an accusatory finger, still smeared with sticky dark BBQ sauce, directly at my chest. "You have to do this. She gave you her 2018 Ford F-150 and housed you rent-free for 9 straight months. Do you know how much money this family has wasted keeping you afloat?" Sarah instantly dropped her tragic victim act, her eyes flashing with pure greed. "That truck only had 40,000 miles on it. The Kelly Blue Book value was at least 22 grand. Plus, I paid for all the water and electricity you used while you lived under my roof." I looked over at my dad. A desperate part of me hoped he would step in and stop this horrifying transaction. Instead, he just picked up his charred burger, took a massive bite, and grunted in agreement while chewing loudly. "Your sister took care of your mess," he mumbled with his mouth full of meat. "It's time to pay up." My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. They were not asking me to help create a life. They were demanding my internal organs as a form of debt collection. My family had calculated the exact cost of my past failures, the rent, the truck, the utilities, and decided my uterus was the perfect repayment plan. I kept my face totally blank. I remembered Aunt Betty telling me that remaining calm is the ultimate form of rebellion. Sarah immediately slapped her perfectly manicured hand on top of the heavy 30-page contract. She shoved it aggressively across the picnic table. It slammed into my paper plate, knocking over my plastic cup. Lukewarm water spilled everywhere, instantly turning my paper napkins to mush. "Just flip to the back page and sign it," my mother commanded, waving her BBQ-stained hand in the air like she was dismissing a servant. Sarah already paid a top-tier Dallas lawyer to draft this up. It's totally standard family stuff. We don't need to ruin a perfectly good holiday by making a big legal fuss out of it. Just sign. I looked down at the thick coil-bound binder. The clear plastic cover was already starting to fog up in the humid, suffocating summer air. I thought about Great Aunt Betty sitting on her porch. I remembered her voice. "Take their power away." I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even raise my voice. Instead, I slowly reached into my cheap leather purse. I unzipped the side pocket and pulled out the thick, bright yellow highlighter Aunt Betty had given me. I uncapped it with a loud, sharp pop. My mother gasped softly. Sarah's eyes widened in sheer, unexpected panic. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah snapped, her voice completely losing its sweet, fragile tone. "I'm a paralegal," I said calmly, staring dead into Sarah's terrified eyes. "I don't sign standard. I read standard. And I have all afternoon." I flipped open the thick, clear plastic cover of the binder. The black coil binding squeaked loudly in the suffocating summer air. Before I could even read the first sentence, a massive Texas horsefly landed directly on the title page. My mother gasped, grabbed a rolled-up coupon magazine, and violently smacked the binder. She killed the bug, leaving a nasty dark streak of blood smeared right across the crisp white paper. "Disgusting," she muttered, wiping her hand on a napkin. But to me that bloody streak looked completely perfect for the document I was about to dissect. My dad suddenly couldn't handle the heavy, suffocating silence. He turned his back to the picnic table, grabbed a heavy metal wire brush, and started aggressively scrubbing the iron grates of his expensive smoker grill. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The harsh, violent metal-on-metal sound echoed across the yard like nails on a chalkboard. He was trying to drown out what was about to happen. I pressed Great Aunt Betty's yellow highlighter against the paper. The title of the document wasn't about love. It read, "Familial Gestational Carrier and Debt Forgiveness Agreement." I started reading aloud. I read at the exact slow, deliberate pace I used when reading commercial leases at my downtown law firm, in exchange for the forgiveness of a 2018 Ford F-150, currently valued at exactly $22,000, and retroactive compensation for housing utilities totaling $1,850. The carrier willingly agrees to provide the priceless gift of life without any coercion. Sarah flinched. The wooden bench creaked as she nervously shifted her weight. She hated hearing her fake, weaponized generosity read out loud like a cheap pawn shop receipt. I didn't say a word. I just firmly pressed the neon yellow marker down and dragged it slowly across the words without any coercion. The bright ink bled through the thick paper. My mother's jaw tightened so hard I thought her teeth would crack. 4 months ago at the law firm, I had helped my boss, a ruthless real estate lawyer, destroy a predatory landlord in downtown Dallas. The landlord had used a so-called good faith clause to legally lock a terrified single mother out of her own apartment. After we won the case, my boss bought me a coffee and said, "The prettiest, sweetest words in a legal contract are always used to hide the ugliest, most evil intentions." I thought about that as I turned to page 3. The paper stuck briefly to my sweating fingers. Page 3 completely abandoned the sweet language of family and went straight into human ownership. I cleared my throat and read Clause 18 out loud, my voice perfectly steady despite the wild hammering of my heart. The carrier explicitly agrees to be legally registered as a high-risk medical dependent under the intended parent's premium corporate health insurance policy. As a result, the intended parents shall receive a $15,000 familial medical stipend directly from said insurance provider. Furthermore, the carrier must exclusively utilize the pre-approved low-budget county clinic network for all routine prenatal care. I stopped reading. The cicadas were screaming in the oak trees. The thick smell of hickory smoke and charred beef made me want to vomit. I looked up and locked eyes with my sister. "Let me get this straight," I said softly. "Your husband's fancy tech company cuts you a massive $15,000 bonus check for my pregnancy, but you legally force me to sit in the waiting room of the overcrowded free county clinic down the street?" Sarah's face flushed a deep, ugly shade of red. She quickly grabbed her plastic cup and took a huge, desperate gulp of her Diet Coke. "It's just basic accounting," she snapped defensively, her voice pitching up an octave. "We need that 15 grand to build the nursery and buy the crib. You don't need fancy, expensive doctors anyway. You're young and healthy. Stop being so dramatic about a few checkups." My mother nodded furiously in agreement. "She's right, you are being completely unreasonable. We are just trying to be smart with our money." I didn't yell. I didn't throw my cup. I didn't tell them how disgusting it was that they were planning to pocket a corporate payout while treating my medical safety like a bargain bin purchase. Instead, I simply looked down, pressed the tip of the highlighter against the paper, and drew a thick, glowing yellow box around the number $15,000. The neon ink practically burned on the page. I took a slow breath of the heavy, humid air. I turned to page 4. Then page 5. I was getting closer to the page Aunt Betty had warned me to find. The page where the real monster was hiding. The silence that followed was heavier than the suffocating Texas heat. My family was used to me quietly folding. They were not used to me reading the fine print. My mother suddenly leaned across the picnic table, her fake smile completely gone. She aggressively reached out to snatch the yellow highlighter right out of my hand. "Stop coloring on a highly expensive legal document like a toddler," she hissed. I quickly pulled my hand back, clutching Aunt Betty's marker tightly against my chest. I wasn't letting go of my only weapon. My dad had finally stopped furiously scrubbing the $2,000 grill. The tension was too much for him, so he reached into the red plastic cooler, pulled out a cheap silver can of beer, and cracked it open. The loud PSSSHT sound cut through the heavy summer air. He took a long, desperate gulp, keeping his back turned to the table. He was actively choosing to ignore the emotional slaughter happening 10 feet behind him. I ignored them both. I turned past page 4. I turned past page 5. The clear plastic cover of the binder was now completely slick with my own nervous sweat. Then, I hit the 6th page. Great Aunt Betty's voice echoed in my head. "Always read the middle pages. That's where they hide the real poison." I scanned the dense, tiny black text until my eyes locked onto Clause 45. I didn't just read it quietly to myself. I read it out loud so the entire neighborhood could hear the absolute sickness of my family's plan. Clause 45. Complete surrender of digital and medical privacy. I read, my voice ringing out clear and sharp over the buzzing of the cicadas. The carrier irrevocably surrenders all rights to bodily privacy. The intended mother reserves the exclusive, unquestioned right to film, broadcast, and monetize all prenatal appointments, hospital visits, emotional distress, and the final birth for use on social media platforms, including but not limited to TikTok, Instagram, and GoFundMe. I stopped. I read it again in my head just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. I wasn't. Furthermore, I continued reading, my hands beginning to shake with pure, unfiltered rage. The carrier agrees to wear pre-selected, aesthetically pleasing clothing provided by the intended mother during all recorded medical emergencies and strictly agrees not to disclose the true nature of this financial arrangement to the public, presenting the pregnancy solely as a miracle family blessing. I lowered the binder. The thick smell of hickory smoke suddenly made me want to throw up. They didn't just want my body to carry a child. They wanted to turn my medical trauma into a highly profitable reality show. Sarah wasn't just demanding a baby, she was demanding content. She wanted to play the role of the tragic, tearful hero on the internet, while legally forcing me to be her silent, aesthetic background prop. My eyes slowly rose to meet Sarah's. Her face had drained of all color, leaving her looking completely pale and terrified. Her perfectly practiced, heartbroken victim mask had entirely melted off in the 102-degree heat. She knew I had found the exact clause she desperately hoped I would skip. My mother nervously wiped her BBQ-stained hands on a napkin. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," my mother stammered, completely unable to make eye contact with me. "Sarah just wants to share her beautiful journey with her online support group. She's been through so much pain, it's just a few videos to help inspire other women, and yes, maybe she can raise a little money to cover the hospital bills." What is so wrong with that? I stared at my mother, completely disgusted by her absolute lack of a soul. A contract that legally forces a woman to wear matching outfits while crying in a hospital bed so her sister can collect TikTok views and GoFundMe donations is not a beautiful journey. It is human exploitation wrapped in a shiny white sundress. I looked back down at the binder. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt the ice-cold, crystal-clear realization that I owed these people absolutely nothing. I pressed the tip of the bright yellow highlighter directly over Clause 45. I pressed down so violently hard that the thick neon ink bled through the heavy cardstock, and the paper gave a satisfying tiny arsipe under the pressure. I dragged the marker across every single sickening word. Then, I closed the binder. I didn't gently slide it back across the table. I picked up the heavy 30-page contract and forcefully tossed it directly into Sarah's lap. It hit her stark white sundress with a heavy thud. Sarah jumped, clutching the binder like it was a live grenade. My parents stared at me like they had just seen a ghost. The trap had failed, and they had absolutely no backup plan. The heavy thud of the 30-page binder hitting Sarah's lap completely broke the spell that had been freezing our family for my entire life. For a split second, nobody breathed. Then Sarah's shock instantly boiled over into pure, venomous rage. She threw the binder onto the wooden bench, stood up so fast her chair tipped backward, and screamed, "You selfish, ungrateful brat! I will drag you to small claims court. I will sue you for every single penny of that $1,850 utility bill, and I will report that F-150 as a stolen vehicle right now if you don't sign." Her true face was finally out in the open. She wasn't a grieving mother. She was a furious boss who had just lost her cheapest employee. The contract sat there, glowing with the bright yellow ink of Clause 45, exposing her plan to turn my body into a viral GoFundMe campaign. I didn't argue with her legal threats. I didn't beg for forgiveness. For the past year, I had let the guilt of that 2018 Ford F-150 weigh me down like a heavy iron chain. I reached deep into the front pocket of my cheap denim shorts. My fingers wrapped around the heavy metal keyring holding the truck keys. I pulled the keys out, held them up so the silver metal caught the blinding Texas sun, and then I dropped them directly into the center of my mother's massive glass bowl of sticky, mayonnaise-filled potato salad. The keys sank right into the yellow mush with a sickening squelch. My mother let out a high-pitched shriek, clutching her chest as if I had just thrown a live bomb onto the table. My dad finally spun around from his grill, dropping his half-empty beer can onto the concrete patio, his mouth hanging wide open in complete disbelief. Suddenly, the top of a shiny bald head slowly peeked over the tall wooden privacy fence. It was Mr. Henderson, the notoriously nosy next-door neighbor, drawn out by Sarah's screaming. "Everything okay over there, folks?" he called out, his eyes darting around the chaotic scene. In a fraction of a second, my mother's face morphed. The furious, hateful glare vanished, replaced by a terrifyingly fake, wide, plastic smile. "Oh, everything is just perfectly fine, Bob," my mother yelled back, her voice shaking but coated in artificial sweetness. "Just a silly little family misunderstanding over a recipe. Happy 4th of July." I looked at my mother desperately performing for the neighbor, and then I looked at my sister, whose white sundress was now stained with a tiny drop of neon yellow highlighter ink. I felt the clean, icy clarity of a woman who finally realizes she is the only sane person left in the asylum. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice completely steady and calm. "You didn't want a sister to help you. You wanted a free, disposable cast member for your tragic internet reality show, and you picked the wrong girl." My dad stepped forward, his face flushed red from the heat and the beer. "Now wait just a minute, young lady. How are you supposed to get home? You don't have a dime to your name," he barked, trying to regain his authority. I looked at him, then glanced over at the smoking metal monster he had bought just for this ambush. "If you need to cover Sarah's precious utility bills so badly," I said softly, "you can always sell that shiny new $2,000 smoker grill." I didn't wait for his response. I turned my back on the checkered picnic table, the ruined potato salad, and the trap they had spent weeks building. I walked straight toward the wooden side gate. I opened it, stepped through, and let it click shut behind me. I didn't slam it. I didn't have to. The quiet sound of the latch locking was the loudest noise I had ever made. I didn't have a car anymore. I was stranded in the suffocating Dallas suburbs in 102-degree heat. I pulled up Google Maps on my cracked phone and saw that I had to walk exactly 2.4 miles down the sizzling Texas concrete to reach the nearest DART public bus stop. My sandals slapped against the boiling pavement. The sun beat down relentlessly on my shoulders, making me sweat through my thin cotton shirt in minutes. But as I walked further and further away from my parents' manicured lawn, a strange sensation washed over me. I had absolutely nothing. I was walking to a dirty city bus stop with $0 in savings and no vehicle. But my chest felt incredibly light. The invisible leash Sarah had been pulling for 9 months was finally snapped in half. I was free. The city bus was basically a rolling oven. The AC was completely broken, and I sat on a sticky plastic seat, staring out the window. My face was still flushed from the 102-degree walk, but my hands were completely steady. I didn't look like a woman who had just nuked her entire family structure. I looked like a tired commuter. My phone started vibrating on the cracked plastic seat next to me. Mom sent a text, "Come back and apologize right now. You are acting like a child." Sarah sent a text, "You ruined my life. I'm calling the Dallas police about the truck right now." My dad sent nothing. He was probably still staring at the potato salad. I turned my phone on silent and shoved it deep into my bag. I didn't go back to my tiny apartment above the laundromat. Instead, I got off 3 stops early and walked the extra 4 blocks to Great Aunt Betty's house. It was almost 4:30 p.m. when Aunt Betty opened her front door and saw my sweaty, sunburned face. She didn't say a single word. She just gently pulled me inside, grabbed a frozen bag of green peas from her freezer, wrapped it in a soft dish towel, and pressed it against my burning neck. I sat down at her vintage kitchen table and finally let out the breath I felt like I had been holding for 9 months. I told her everything. I told her about the horrific Clause 45. I told her about the plan to turn my medical care into a GoFundMe campaign and TikTok videos. I told her how I used her yellow highlighter to rip the page, and how I dropped the truck keys right into Mom's potato salad. Aunt Betty sat quietly, her wrinkled hands folded on the table. When I finished, she gave a slow, firm nod. "You cut out the poison, child," she said softly. "You did the right thing." "It doesn't feel like a victory," I whispered, staring at the floor. "Surviving a trap never feels like a victory right away. It just feels exhausting," Aunt Betty replied. She got up and poured me a glass of ice water. "But your sister is deeply addicted to attention. Her whole plan was to sell a tragedy on the internet. Since you took away the baby, she will use your rejection instead. I promise you, she will post a crying video on TikTok or Facebook by tomorrow morning, begging her followers for sympathy and money." I took a slow sip of the freezing water. I felt a sudden, sharp calm wash over me. I reached into my bag and pulled out my cracked phone. "I know she will," I said, looking up at my great-aunt. "That's why I took pictures." Aunt Betty stopped wiping the counter. She turned around, raising one thin silver eyebrow. When Dad was violently scraping that metal grill, and Mom was busy gasping at the bug she killed, I kept the binder propped up, I explained. I secretly slid my phone out and snapped 3 crystal-clear, high-resolution photos of the title page and Clause 45. You can clearly see the neon yellow highlight right over the GoFundMe and TikTok section. Aunt Betty let out a rich, deep laugh that filled the small kitchen. She walked over and kissed the top of my head. "You really are my girl," she whispered. But I knew a picture on a phone wasn't enough. If I posted it raw, Sarah could actually sue me for defamation or breach of privacy. I needed to act fast, and I needed to do it perfectly. Because I didn't have a paper copy, I couldn't just use a black Sharpie like a normal person. I immediately called my best friend from the law firm, an IT and cybersecurity guy named Marcus. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed to digitally blur a highly sensitive legal document so it was completely untraceable, and I needed it done tonight. Marcus was a computer genius who hated bullies just as much as I did. He didn't even ask for the backstory. Within 30 minutes, Marcus had set up a secure encrypted video call with me on Aunt Betty's laptop. I securely sent him the photos. While Betty and I watched his screen, Marcus used a professional editing software to digitally scrub all our last names, the Dallas addresses, the law firm's watermark, and the specific truck details. But he left every single horrifying, exploitive word of Clause 45 perfectly, sharply readable. By 7 p.m. I had 3 perfectly redacted digital images. The trap was documented, the proof was secured. Now all we had to do was wait for my sister to make her move. Aunt Betty was right. We didn't have to wait long. My sister lasted exactly 14 hours before her addiction to attention took over. I woke up the next morning at 6 a.m. on Aunt Betty's soft guest bed. The Dallas morning sun was already heating up the room. I grabbed my phone and opened TikTok. Right there at the top of my feed was Sarah. She had recorded a highly edited 3-minute crying video. She was sitting on her expensive living room rug, still wearing that same stark white sundress. She looked directly into the camera, tears streaming down her perfectly powdered cheeks. "Yesterday my own sister shattered my heart," Sarah sobbed to her 10,000 followers. "I offered her everything I had, and she cruelly refused to help carry my miracle baby out of pure greed. I am completely devastated." Then the real reason for the video popped up on the screen. A shiny link to a GoFundMe page, begging her followers for exactly $50,000 to help cover her severe emotional trauma and medical recovery. I didn't cry. I didn't feel hurt. I just felt a cold, sharp focus. I walked into the kitchen, poured a mug of black coffee, and opened my laptop. It was time. I didn't write a long, emotional essay. I just let the legal contract speak for itself. I took the 3 digitally redacted photos Marcus had scrubbed for me and posted them directly to Reddit's Legal Advice Forum and a massive Dallas community Facebook page with over 100,000 members. My caption was exactly 3 sentences long. "This is a coercive contract my family tried to force me to sign yesterday at a holiday BBQ. It demands I surrender my medical privacy so they can monetize my pregnancy for TikTok views and pocket a $15,000 corporate insurance payout. Always read the fine print before doing favors for family." Then I went back to TikTok and posted the photos as a direct reply video to Sarah's crying face. You people out there who have ever been bullied into silence by a narcissist, you know how terrifying it is to finally speak up. But the internet is a very fast, very brutal judge. By 10 a.m. my Reddit post had 4,000 upvotes. By 1 p.m. people in the Dallas Facebook group had recognized the contract language. A local nurse commented, "Wait, Clause 45, forcing someone to use the free county clinic while pocketing corporate insurance money, is literally insurance fraud." By 3:30 p.m., Sarah's GoFundMe page was completely gone. A massive gray banner appeared over her link that read, "Campaign suspended due to multiple reports of fraudulent activity." The trap she had built for me had completely collapsed on top of her. I decided to go back to my own apartment that evening to pack some more clothes. At 6:30 p.m., I walked down the stairs to the hot, humid laundromat on the first floor to switch my laundry. The smell of cheap detergent filled the air. Suddenly, the glass door of the laundromat swung open. It wasn't my sister. It was Greg, Sarah's husband. He was a high-level manager at a massive Dallas tech company. He was wearing a wrinkled $200 designer polo shirt, and he was sweating heavily. He looked around the empty laundromat, terrified someone might see him. "You need to take the posts down right now," Greg demanded, his voice shaking. He didn't sound heartbroken. He sounded like a cornered rat. I folded a towel, completely ignoring his panic. "I didn't use any names, Greg. I just posted a blank contract." Greg quickly reached into his expensive leather wallet. He pulled out a crisp, pre-written personal check and slammed it down on top of the washing machine. I looked at it. It was written out to me for exactly $5,000. "My company's HR department saw the Facebook post," Greg hissed, his face pale. "Someone recognized the specific insurance policy mentioned in your photo. They called me into a meeting this afternoon. They are launching a full investigation into my insurance records for attempted fraud. If I get fired, we lose the house. Just take the $5,000 and delete the photos." I looked at the $5,000 check vibrating on top of the spin cycle. This was the man who sat silently in his big house while his wife plotted to use my body as a cash grab. He wasn't sorry. He was just trying to buy his way out of the consequences. "I don't accept bribes, Greg," I said softly. I picked up the check, ripped it cleanly in half, and dropped the pieces into the nearby plastic trash can. "And you should probably go call a lawyer." Greg stood there, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He turned around and basically ran out the door into the hot Dallas evening. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a voicemail from my dad. I pressed play. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just yelled, his voice slurred with cheap beer. "You are destroying Greg's career over a stupid piece of paper. You are tearing this family apart." I deleted the voicemail. A rotten family is like a rotten tooth. You can ignore the pain for years, but the only way to actually heal is to completely pull it out by the roots. I picked up my laundry basket and walked back upstairs. My hands were perfectly steady. A family like ours is a rotting wooden bridge. You can paint over the termites for decades, but the second someone jumps up and down, the whole structure collapses into the river. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel powerful. I felt incredibly exhausted in the exact way you feel when you finally drop a massive weight you've been carrying for 31 years. I made a cup of instant coffee and sat by my rattling window AC unit. Sarah had written the contract. Greg had funded it. My parents had enforced it. I had just refused to sign it. If anyone in your life is currently trying to trap you with a past favor, a guilt trip, or a twisted version of a story where they are always the victim, you are allowed to read the fine print. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to let the bridge collapse. Exactly 3 weeks after the 4th of July BBQ, my dad showed up at the laundromat downstairs. It was a scorching Tuesday afternoon. I hadn't spoken to any of them since I ripped up Greg's $5,000 bribe. Dad wasn't holding a beer this time. He was wearing an old faded baseball cap, and he looked smaller than I remembered. I didn't invite him up to my apartment. We stood awkwardly next to the humming industrial dryers. "Greg lost his job," my dad mumbled, staring at the dirty linoleum floor. "HR fired him for attempting corporate insurance fraud. Sarah is having a complete mental breakdown. They had to put the house up for sale to avoid bankruptcy." He didn't sound angry anymore. He just sounded defeated. "I didn't fire him, Dad. His own greed fired him," I replied coldly. He slowly nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He held it out to me. Your mother demanded I give you the keys to the F-150 back. She said we look bad keeping it. I stared at the thick white envelope. I remembered the heavy, suffocating feeling of driving that truck, constantly feeling my sister's invisible leash choking me. I don't want it, I said, stepping back. Sell it. Use the money to help Greg pay his lawyers, or use it to buy yourself a better grill. I don't care. I'm done paying for that truck. My dad's shoulders slumped. He put the envelope back in his pocket. He turned around and walked out into the blazing Dallas heat without another word. It was the last time I ever spoke to my father. Fall finally pushed the brutal summer heat out of Texas. My apartment was still tiny, but the silence inside was completely mine. I got a major promotion at the law firm. I went from being a junior paralegal to leading the entire commercial lease review team. I bought myself a reliable, used Honda Civic with my own money. Aunt Betty came over every single Sunday. She brought fresh yellow roses from her garden, and we drank sweet tea on my small balcony. Sarah never posted another public video. The shame of the HR investigation forced her to completely delete her social media accounts. My mother blocked my number, which was the greatest gift she could have ever given me. By November, exactly 4 months after the BBQ disaster, I was sitting at a fancy downtown Dallas restaurant, celebrating my promotion with Marcus, the IT guy who helped me scrub the contract. We were eating expensive steak and laughing about a ridiculous case at the firm. Right after the waiter cleared our plates, Marcus suddenly got quiet. He tapped his water glass nervously. You know, Marcus said, looking at me seriously, my older sister works for a massive nonprofit here in Dallas. They specifically place foster kids who have aged out of the traditional system, mostly teenagers who just need a safe place to land while they finish high school. Have you ever thought about mentoring? I had spent my entire life being treated like a burden by my own family. I had never allowed myself to think I could be a safe space for someone else. I took a slow breath and looked at Marcus. I think I'd like to try, I said. I started the massive mountain of background checks and training courses the very next week. The social worker assigned to me was a tough, no-nonsense woman named Maria. During my final home inspection in January, Maria sat on my cheap sofa, rapidly clicking her pen. You have a very small apartment, Maria noted, looking around. And you are single. Are you sure you have the emotional support system to handle a struggling teenager? I smiled. I thought about Great Aunt Betty's yellow highlighter. I thought about Marcus scrubbing the files for me. I don't have a big family, I told Maria. But the family I do have knows exactly how to read the fine print and stand their ground. Maria stopped clicking her pen. She smiled and wrote something down on her clipboard. In late March, 9 months after the explosive BBQ, I drove my little Honda Civic to the nonprofit's main office. The waiting room smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. Sitting in the corner chair was a 17-year-old girl named Chloe. Chloe was wearing a heavily patched, oversized denim jacket that looked like it had survived a war, and she was tightly gripping a thick, worn-out SAT prep book. She didn't look at me like a terrified child. She looked at me like a suspicious lawyer reviewing a bad settlement offer. She had spent the last 4 years bouncing between crowded group homes. She knew exactly how the system worked. I sat down in the plastic chair across from her. I didn't try to hand her a toy or force a warm, motherly smile. I just set my car keys on the small table between us. My name is Haley, I said calmly. I heard you need a quiet place to study for your college exams. My apartment is tiny, and it's right above a loud laundromat, but the AC works, and I promise I will never ask you to scrub my baseboards. Chloe narrowed her dark eyes, studying my face for any hidden traps. Are you going to take pictures of me for your Facebook to show everyone what a great person you are? She asked, her voice sharp and defensive. I actually laughed. It was a real, genuine laugh. I don't even have a Facebook account, I told her, and I hate having my picture taken. Chloe slowly relaxed her grip on the heavy prep book. The defensive wall didn't completely fall, but a small crack appeared. Okay, she muttered softly. I like quiet. I didn't know it yet, but by Thanksgiving, Chloe would be aggressively arguing with me about the best way to cook a turkey. I didn't know that by Christmas she would finally take off that heavy denim jacket inside the apartment. I only knew, sitting in that stale-smelling waiting room, that I had found someone who understood the value of a locked door and a safe space. Fast forward to exactly 18 months after the explosive 4th of July BBQ. It was a freezing Tuesday evening in late January. Chloe and I were sitting on my cheap living room rug. She was holding a thick, crisp white envelope from the University of Texas at Austin. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely tear the paper. I didn't rush her. I just sat there, breathing in the smell of the cheap frozen pizza we had just pulled out of the oven. She finally ripped the top open and pulled out the letter. Her eyes darted rapidly across the page. Then, she dropped the paper, covered her face with her hands, and let out a loud, breathless sob. "I got in," she cried, leaning into my shoulder. "I actually got in." I wrapped my arms around her, holding her tightly. I didn't ask her for anything in return. I didn't hand her an invoice for the groceries or the late-night study snacks. Love, the real kind, is completely free. In late May, the Texas heat returned, and so did graduation day. The high school stadium was packed and loud. I sat in the metal bleachers next to Marcus and Great Aunt Betty. My family, my parents, my sister Greg, were completely absent. I hadn't heard a single word from them in over a year, and the silence was beautiful. When Chloe walked across that stage in her bright blue cap and gown, Aunt Betty squeezed my hand so hard it almost hurt. After the ceremony, we stood by the chain-link fence for pictures. Aunt Betty reached into her floral purse and pulled out a small rectangular gift box. She handed it to Chloe. Chloe opened it carefully. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was a brand new bright yellow highlighter. Chloe looked confused for a second, but I smiled, my eyes filling with tears. "It's a family tradition, sweetheart," Aunt Betty told Chloe, her blue eyes sparkling. "For college. Always read the fine print and never be afraid to draw a thick line through a bad deal." Chloe smiled widely and hugged the old woman tightly. 2 months later, I packed Chloe's bags into the trunk of my reliable, used Honda Civic. We drove 3 hours south to her new college dorm. I didn't feel the crushing weight of a toxic sibling's charity car. I felt the smooth, steady hum of an engine I paid for with my own hard-earned money. I helped her carry her boxes up 3 flights of stairs. I helped her make her twin-sized bed. Before I left, I stood by her open dorm room window, feeling the warm summer breeze. I thought about 30-page binders and manipulative BBQ dinners. I thought about parents who demand payment for their love, and sisters who try to legally steal your future. A strong woman is not someone who just silently takes the abuse. A strong woman is someone who rips up the contract and builds her own table. I chose to walk away at 31. I chose my own family. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to draw a hard line against the people who were supposed to protect you, I want you to know how deeply I appreciate you staying here until the very end. It takes a certain kind of strength to face these ugly truths, and sharing this journey with you has made it all feel worth it. If you felt the weight of this story and want to stay connected for more raw, powerful narratives about surviving and thriving, please take a second to hit like and subscribe. There's a seat saved right here for you. We've got plenty more truth to uncover together. See you in the next one.